So this is episode 2, and we're going to cover a lot of topics. But first, I'd just like to say welcome back to our very small band of followers and supporters, and our significantly larger band of detractors, xenophobes, conspiracy theorists, Gemma Doherty fans. A lot of Gemma Doherty fans following the channel. Shout out to God fans. So just to let people know, over the last 2 weeks, so that we haven't put any content out, we have got some attention, which is encouraging. I think we've hit 110 subscribers on YouTube, and our first hour-long audio has hit its 1.1 thousand views or something. But I think all of our videos currently have a higher negative reaction to a positive reaction. And a lot of comments calling me a leftist soy boy cuck and all the stuff you kind of expect. I think in the first video, I said, whenever this goes live and it gets twigged onto by the far right, the xenophobic right, the populist right, that we were going to see the comment section was going to be a zoo or something like that. And it's certainly entertaining to see that kind of reaction coming out. But so the small band of supporters, hi again, to the ever larger far right attention that we're getting, hi to you too. So and everyone's welcome to watch, try maybe we'll all learn something together. So the first thing that I wanted to come to talking to today is to go back to the lack of any government in Northern Ireland. We've previously talked on the show about the supposed new round of intensified talks that were announced in the wake of the shocking killing of Lyra McKee. And these new talks are supposed to be bringing together our divided politicians and try to get the local devolved Stormont Assembly back up and running. As previously reported, though, the first session of this intensified talks lasted all of 25 minutes, which was an insult. And the latest news that's sort of coming out that I have seen was when Michelle O'Neill, the leader of Sinn Féin, was arguing that the talks process should not break down for the summer. I'm not sure who proposed, or if anyone had proposed, that the intensified talks should go take a summer holiday. But the talks are currently in their 9th week. I have not seen anything substantial coming out of them yet, but I think it's still up in the air about whether or not the talks process is gonna take a summer holiday. But it seems to me it's absolutely the case that these public servants, dealing with the biggest problem, the fact that we have no government at all right now, no decisions being made, as the health service gets worse, as the education service gets worse, as everything seems to be getting worse. There's no decisions being made. So there's no time for delays. I think everybody here in the north agrees with that. There's no time for delays and holidays. You're still drawing a wage. Keep talking, keep working, and keep sorting it out. But whenever the talks process has been talked about in the local media here, with the BBC's Stephen Nolan, or with the likes of commentators, I heard a discussion between Alex Kane and Malachy O'Doherty, I think, on the radio. There's a lot of talk of red lines, and there's a lot of sort of onus being put on Sinn Féin. And Arlene Foster, the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party, indeed tweeted out a week or so ago, saying that Sinn Féin's idea of negotiation, there's a quote now, is to lay down demands and expect everyone else to accede to them. And I just don't think that's really necessarily true. And I don't think it's a healthy way to talk about these very serious issues. And in fact, if Sinn Féin's negotiation policy is to lay down red lines, actually the draft agreement that was leaked, do you remember that? The draft agreement between Sinn Féin and the DUP to get Stormont back up and running. Those red lines didn't look like red lines to me. Marriage equality in particular, I think there was one sentence dedicated to marriage equality which said that the two parties respect or acknowledge that they have different positions on this. So, how much of a red line is it if they're that quick or that ready to throw it under a bus? When we talk about the talks, and that seems to be a big thing here in the North, meetings about meetings, but there are three key issues that really have, amongst other things, led to the frustrations and it showed that Stormont is not a workable government. It's not a viable government and can't deal with civil rights issues. And those three issues are marriage equality, a woman's right to choose, and the Irish language. So those are three issues that there's been no movement on, despite massive public protests and marches and political parties having various stances. But although there's a great demand for these civil rights changes, nothing's happened. And if you just look at these civil rights issues, they are enjoyed by people enjoy is the wrong word perhaps, but they are available to people or accessible to people in England, Scotland, Wales, and now the Republic of Ireland post the referendums. Same-sex marriage is available to people. If you require abortion, if you require that sort of medical service, then that's available to you. And also, language is respected. Minority languages are respected. And the plurality of languages is to at least some degree in all those areas respected. So, and here in the North, public opinion is not that different. 2/3 of people in the North support marriage equality, according to some opinion polls. Some opinion polls putting it even higher, in like the high 70s, low 80s maybe, in terms of percentage for support. A majority of parties, a majority of MLAs in the North, members of the Legislative Assembly in Stormont, they support it, and indeed supported a motion that was actually put to Stormont before it collapsed. Multiple times it went to Stormont, and the last time it was voted on, it was actually, there was a majority, a slim majority of one, but there was a majority of MLAs in support of extending same-sex marriage to the North. But because the DUP could at the time veto whatever they wanted, it didn't go anywhere, and that's democracy denied, in my opinion. And likewise, with a very high support for marriage equality in the North, there's also 3/4 of people in the North are supportive of relaxing the abortion laws here, and would support abortion to be accessible in certain cases, such as fatal fetal abnormality, such as in regards to incest, children conceived of incest and things like that. So over half of the people in the North support decriminalization of abortion, at least. So once again, you have the case where the majority of people want change to varying degrees. I think we have to accept that. Some people in the North are for the same rights to abortion that people have in England, Scotland, Wales. Some people would prefer it to be just in specific cases. That debate goes on, that's fine. But the majority of people here want some change, but you can't get change. And so again, democracy is denied. And what's the point of having a government if the government can't make changes? Can't really pass any legislation because it always gets vetoed in one way or another. And an Irish Language Act, which is the other, I think, big key civil rights issue that the North of Ireland's facing right now. It's not as broadly supported because a majority of unionists oppose an Irish Language Act, whilst the majority of Republicans and others support one. But it's interesting to note, though, that according to research done by Lucid Talk, Jamie Powell of Lucid Talk, 50% of DUP voters would not support their party if it compromised, but 45% of DUP voters would accept some sort of compromise. 60% of non-DUP unionists wouldn't support a compromise. So there's actually more non-DUP unionists who are uncompromising on this issue than DUP voters, which is interesting, I think. But the reality is that most people as a whole in Northern Ireland either want an Irish Language Act to respect the Irish language, or at least they wouldn't consider one a compromise on one to be the end of the world. And so again, whenever you look at that in its totality, but no decision can be made, no changes will be forthcoming, and just, I think compromise sometimes comes across as a dirty word in certain unionist circles. So once again, nothing likely to be done. So I think whenever we talk about the Stormont talks process and we talk about devolution of political decision making, and when we talk about governance in the North as a northern entity, and with Brexit and a border poll and all this sort of stuff, this could all be potentially moot anyway. There's so much still to be decided and so much still to be figured out over the next year, couple of years, few years, who knows. But it's not about red lines, and it's not about shopping lists, and it's not about accusing other people of having red lines and shopping lists and all the political games that go in there. And it's not just about navel gazing and, it really is. It's a demand for democracy. A demand for democracy that is being raised by the people. As I say, 3 key civil rights issues that can bring people out onto the streets in their thousands, if not tens of thousands. And I encourage Sinn Féin and other political parties and everyone out there who's interested in politics. If you're watching this show, you're probably interested in politics to one degree or another. But what is the point of bringing Stormont back immediately, as is the demand of so many people who would probably describe themselves as the liberals and those in the centre? I would describe them as that, but I think they would probably self-identify as the liberals and centrists. But so the demand, and there were marches across Northern Ireland at one point, people saying, get back to work now, get Stormont back up and running. And it's like, okay, maybe, but no, what's the point if you're going to just bring back the exact same Stormont that was there that fell apart in the first place? So I think what we as a society should be maybe talking a bit more is, what kind of reforms do we want? And what kind of Stormont would work to govern this place if we still want to have devolved power to decide things. Because eventually, if the Tories remain in power over in Britain and Northern Ireland remains within the UK's jurisdiction, I think we all know the second that they don't need the DUP to prop up their government, they will ditch the whole current nothing policy where nothing happens here. No devolution and no direct rule. It will go back to one of those things. And if we're going to rush back to devolution under the same old Stormont, which doesn't get anything done, I think how much legislation did they actually pass? Just nothing of note, nothing that would really leap out over the many years of their existence. I don't think any of us could sit here and go, oh, well, here's a big long list of all the great things Stormont did. Although if anyone has stuff, please let me know. But anyway, so without fundamental reform, and that's sort of, I hope, what these talks are supposed to be looking at. So we will see in time. But if they just go back to the way things were, it's only a matter of time before it collapses again. And that's really not in any of our interests. So I've probably flogged that to death. So I want to get on to this other story that leapt out of me. Someone had actually sent it to me, I think. It was a letter written to the newsletter entitled, "How Can Gay Talking Therapy for Adults Be Banned, but Trans Surgery for Teens Be Allowed?" And it was just really, I've seen some bad opinion pieces, and I've seen some dodgy letters written into our local newspapers. But this one was bad and dodgy. It was written supposedly by a Dr. Eoin Gallagher, who says he's a GP with 20 years experience, who works with some of the most vulnerable people in our society in mental health centers. And the reason that this person was writing into the newsletter was because Colorado has recently become the latest state in the United States of America to ban gay conversion therapy. 17 states in total currently ban the dangerous practice. So the good Dr. Gallagher writes in and says that banning gay conversion therapy is hypocritical and, I quote, discriminatory towards mature gay adults who are being denied their choice of sexuality, conversion, as if that's the thing. While immature pubescent children who have self-identified themselves as being of the wrong gender are encouraged to have gender reassignment treatment that often includes major irreversible surgery. Right. So I have a lot that I would like to respond to that letter. Obviously, working in the LGBT community, I have some experience. I'm by no means an expert on this topic. I am not trans. I have never really looked. I've never studied the system in great depth. But working in the community alongside trans people, I have some inkling and some understanding. And I think I have enough of an understanding to point out that sexual orientation and gender identity are not choices. You don't, as a straight person, one day go, do you know what? I'd really love to be gay, actually. And certainly as a gay person, no gay person of their own volition would say, do you know what? I'd really love to be straight. Unless, and the only time that I have ever heard that actually said is in the context of it's really hard to be gay. It's a sin. It's, it's very hard to get by in my family because of being gay. Certainly, if I could be straight, I would. And that's a natural response to a homophobic and heterosexist world. But gender identity is not a choice. Whenever you look at all the difficulties that trans people have in our society, being highly marginalized and treated really badly in so many ways, and all the rigmarole of going through the gender identity clinic, which is like an excessively long and complicated, and I think particularly arbitrary process. Why would anyone in their right mind go, yeah, I think I'd just rather be the other gender. That would be fun for me, and go through all of that. That's not how it works. Research shows that transgender youth often begin to recognize that the gender they are being recognized as by others and the gender that they personally identify as is different. That can start as young as 6, but the mean age is 10.4 years. And then it generally takes about 3 years to learn the different labels and terminology to identify as trans, that being trans is a thing, and that's what you're feeling and identifying as. Because there's a period of confusion, I think, for a lot of people, and that period of confusion is probably lessening as information becomes more accessible, as trans voices get lifted up and are heard more. That period of figuring things out probably will get shorter over time. But if people want to look that up, that's Transgender Youth Invisible and Vulnerable by Arnold H. Grossman, PhD, and Anthony R. Dougelli, PhD. So there's research out there. We're not talking about this as, leftist liberal soy boy cucks who just have, crazy commie opinions that we have, been handed by George Soros. If only it was as simple as just waiting for the line to come down from George. But actually, there's research that has been done into this stuff, and you can look it up too, right-wingers. You can look it up too and have a read, and I'm sure that you'll come back and say, oh, we have our own research. It's like, yeah, but our research was done by people with degrees rather than people with dog collars. So, think about it. So from what I can tell, gender dysphoria is really quite difficult and often terrible experience, because I've talked to trans people and watched trans YouTubers like Natalie Wynn, who runs ContraPoints. Very good show if you want to learn a bit about the trans experience and gender dysphoria and things like that. Very, very good way of putting that across. So, and the DSM, which is the manual for medical practitioners, used to list gender identity disorder as a disorder within its list of psychology and mental health issues. And that was eventually replaced then. So gender identity disorder was replaced with gender dysphoria because, again, doctors aren't always right. Medical science is not always right. They are building on the body of research over time, learning more. Exactly the same. There's good parallels with homosexuality. over the years, the way that has been treated as mental illness and disorder, and then eventually, oh, actually, that's just some people are like that, and it's not actually a threat, and okay. So there's no need to pathologize everything. And there is a distinction now between gender dysphoria, which is the presence of clinically significant distress, and gender nonconforming. And gender nonconforming, which is different from dysphoria, because even the scientists and the medical practitioners are recognizing that being trans does not always come with an experience of dysphoria. But for those who do experience that dysphoria, it's been shown time and time again that it can be alleviated by treatments and surgeries, be it something as basic as laser hair removal, or something like hormone treatment, or yes, indeed, bodily surgery. Now, the doctor says that children, prepubescent young children, are being encouraged to have gender reassignment treatment that often includes major irreversible surgery. In Ireland, you have to be 18 to have any of that kind of surgery. You can be 16 or 17 if you have parental consent, which, that could be iffy. But in the UK, you need to get a court order to get surgery before you're 18. And I'm less familiar with the US system, which you may well be referring to, but it does seem that certain states allow some surgeries before 16 with parental consent. The purpose of that treatment and that therapy is to assist the trans person to embody and reflect how they view themselves and see themselves, to alleviate dysphoria. So it's not, as he wrote in his letter, that there are, medical people out there who are trying to push, or trans activists who are trying to encourage and push people to have surgery. That is a very common anti-trans trope, that these trans activists are bullying kids into having surgeries they don't need and don't want. That's not happening. It legally can't happen here. In Ireland, you need to be 18, as I say, 16, 17 with parental consent. No prepubescent children being pushed by the gay agenda to go get surgeries. For a doctor with 20 years experience, I would expect this man to be able to do a Google search. But apparently he's not capable of doing that. But in any case, he compares the legality of treatment and surgeries and hormone and such treatment for trans people to, and saying, well, if that's allowed, how can people talk about banning gay conversion therapy, gay talking therapy, as he puts it, which is gross misrepresentation. Gay conversion therapy, as it is called, therapy, right? It is proven time and time again to be about teaching young lesbian, gay, or bisexual people to repress their feelings, not to realign themselves or to be treated to better reflect their beings and their feelings and their thoughts and their emotions. No. That's what the trans treatment does. The anti-gay conversion stuff, which is nonsense, it is the opposite of that. It is designed to make you repress feelings because, and they vary on this. Some say that, some conversion groups will even go so far as to say, look, it's fine. It's fine. You can feel that way. You just can't act on it, right? It's not a bad thing to be gay. It's just bad to be gay with another person in a bedroom. And it's like, okay. So according to a study by the Williams Institute, which works out of the Faculty of Law at UC at Los Angeles, again, academia and research, stuff you can go away and read rather than just picking up whatever your pastor tells you or your far-right politician tells you. So according to that study from UC Los Angeles, 750,000 teenagers in America have received the so-called therapy, and 300,000 more are at risk of being subjected to the practice, which is increasingly being recognized as harmful, including by bodies within the National Health Service in Britain. Tens of thousands of young people will receive this non-treatment, this anti-therapy in the US from a healthcare provider, but many, many more will receive it from a faith leader. And that tells us what we need to know. This is not medicine. This is not science. This is not research. This is religion. And religion and supporting LGBT people don't have a great track record. So gay conversion centers in America have literally had children die in their care from abuse and neglect and malnourishment. And survivors of some of the programs have described intimidation, bullying, abuse. And it becomes very clear that many people go through these programs and play along because essentially they're under duress, right? They're young people under duress. They've been told by their family, well, God says that you're broken and you need to get fixed. So we're going to send you to this camp, and the camp's going to turn you straight, or it's going to at least tell you to stop acting out, right? And kids are abused in these facilities and suffer in these facilities and often come out the other end of these facilities far worse off in terms of mental health than when they go in. And I've known people who have went here in Belfast in the north of Ireland. I know people who have went into these, this where, you know, you sit around in a circle and someone tells you about how important it is not to be gay. And basically did that because if they didn't do that, their parents wouldn't let them sleep in the house. They put a mattress in the shed, I think, or a sleeping bag or something in the shed and said, until you're straight, you're not living in the house with the rest of the family. They pulled him out of school. They pulled him out of school and decided to homeschool him, and all they would homeschool him was a religion. So, of course, whenever they said, right, you need to go to this anti-gay therapy talk group, you need to go and do this and become straight, of course that person would say, yeah, absolutely, I'll do it. I'll do whatever gets me out of the shed and back into the house. So this is not medical treatment. It's phony treatment and therapy. And if you look at the number of people who go through it and come out the other end worse for wear, people who have went through it and people who have actually run anti-gay groups have actually turned around and went on to lead groups protesting the anti-gay groups, which is just, you know, it shows you how bad it is. I don't think anyone has done it the other way, where they've, you know, they used to be gay and now they're like passionately anti-gay. I don't know how that argument could be constructed. There may be one or two, but there are certainly not in any number. But the number of people who have went through this anti-gay therapy and turned around and said, actually, as adults, like, I'm going to protest that. I'm going to say that's wrong. What they did to me was wrong. That was abuse. That's really high. That's really high. And also, you just need to look at the number of people who preach this stuff. You know, God says gays are evil. You have to be cured. You have to be fixed. And who then later go on to get caught in bed with another man or a rent boy or, you know, whatever. Like, come on. It's so common that it's almost farcical. So can we all just be real for a second with each other? So this doctor comparing gender realignment surgery with gay conversion therapy and drawing an equivalency and saying, well, you can't ban one and allow the other. It's a false equivalence. It's misrepresenting key research that's out there, and it's writing in such a way to cause a reaction and inflame public ignorance and reaction. Kids, little prepubescent kids are being encouraged to go get, you know, surgery that can't be fixed. It's just nonsense. And I think that you could be pretty sure that someone somewhere involved in certifying that what a GP does, I think it's safe to say they'll be getting a letter from quite a few people. And that doctor might be getting a call. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is to do with environmental protesters receiving death threats over in County Tyrone here. Reports have been coming out of Greencastle in County Tyrone that prominent ecological activists who've been protesting against the creation of a gold mine in the area have been in receipt of actual death threats. Dalradian Gold, which is a mining company from Canada, purchased an exploratory prospecting license in the area and have submitted a 10,000-page planning application to mine for gold in, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Currahinault, near Greencastle. And local residents have pulled together to protest the move, with over 10,000 objections to the gold mine being lodged. And there's a very strong sense that the concerns of the locals have not been factored into the equation in decision making. Information has also not been forthcoming from the politicians or Dalradian itself back to the people. And now we see reports of 2 altercations coming from Greencastle, with one prominent campaigner protesting the gold mine, Mr. Cormac McAleer, who says that he was confronted by a man carrying a nail bar. And now 3 campaigners in the area have been approached by the PSNI and advised that their lives may be under threat, credible threat. They've been given booklets apparently advising them on how to beef up home security, which must be a real load off their minds after being told that there are people out to kill them. It's like, check under your car, get a security light, you'll be fine. This is part of a much wider saga about natural resources in the north of Ireland, and I imagine in the south of Ireland, although I'm a little bit less well read on that. In 2016, there was a very similar incident in Woodburn Forest in County Antrim. A company called Infostrata, which is an oil and gas drilling company supported by investors, was given the green light by Northern Ireland Water and the Department for Enterprise, Trade and Investment to drill an exploratory well in the forest, Woodburn Forest, looking for natural gas. Opposition really quickly gathered, if you remember, with environmental protesters voicing concerns about the nearby reservoir, which is only 380 meters away from the supposed drill position. A group called Stop the Drill held protests, and there were standoffs with the PSNI, who were obviously there to ensure that the work went on, and that protesters didn't prevent the progress of money making, disregarding everything else. There was at least one protester arrested, and the initial drill to 2,000 meters, it didn't find anything. And at that point, the investors pulled out of the project rather than keep drilling deeper. And I would hope that the protests and the bad PR, that played into as part of that. It was factored into that decision making. But in any case, these 2 examples of drilling for gas in Woodburn Forest or mining for gold in Greencastle, they're not the only examples that are actually out there. When I looked this up, mineral prospecting licenses cost only £450 each, and they've been granted for about a quarter of the land mass of the north of Ireland. So about a quarter of the land in the 6 counties of the north is now, people have bought licenses to go, right, we're going to go look for gold or shale gas or whatever. The findings of those explorations can be kept a secret from the public for 10 years. I suppose that's to give companies time to organize a dig or a drill before other companies start sniffing around, or before, much more likely, before protesters get there first, to try and stop it. But it's clear that the government and corporations are quite content to organize a lot of this in secrecy, and then carry it out in secrecy with very little information being handed out. And questions are then asked by protesters and the public, answers are not forthcoming. So I'm sure you'll all stand in solidarity, as I will, with those protesting the Dalradian mine, and receiving these death threats, which is just beyond the pale. There are genuine concerns that people have about these kinds of operations in our beautiful countryside. It's not just a matter of a small hole in the ground where they go and fetch gold, or a single gas well that doesn't take up very much space with and this is what they say, it'll have no impact on the natural environment. It's fine. Just let us go in and get the gold and stuff. But it's heavy vehicles driving up and down, transporting machinery and fuel and other necessities for a very active dig site. It's heavy vehicles taking away the oil and the gas or whatever they're finding from the area to wherever it's going to be processed and sold. This is dirty work. And if you don't think that it'll damage the local flora and fauna, you're kidding yourself. A handful of people might profit from these operations. Some local drivers maybe, but you can bet that a lot of the workers that will be brought in for this mine and for other things are people with skills learned elsewhere and experts in this field from elsewhere. And while some people will profit, the rest of us will be left with scarred environments, if not worse. So the world needs ecological care and renewable fuels, and we need to move away from fossil fuels, and the economy in Northern Ireland and in the south needs to look beyond mere plunder of natural resources. We do not need more gold, folks. We need more fresh water, and we need more green space and space for animals and plants. We need to take the ecological disaster more seriously than we are. So solidarity to the protesters fighting everywhere for the planet. My thoughts are with those workers whose lives have been threatened in Greencastle and elsewhere, and also with the increasing number of young students who are on the going on school strike and such, which we'll touch on more probably in a separate segment. But especially out there to those who are currently under death threats, keep up the good fight, basically. So this is going to be a difficult one to talk about, and will undoubtedly engender a response from my many Gemma O'Doherty fans out there. So Gemma O'Doherty recently, she is a leading light of the far right in Ireland, and I'll say it again until it gets through your thick layer of xenophobia and racialist nonsense. She is a conspiracist wackadoodle, okay? She recently shared a tweet that was put up by Paul Joseph Watson, notorious far-right figure. And people who have been saying to me, Gemma's not far-right, she's a national treasure. Gemma's not far-right, she just wants to save our country. Gemma's not far-right, she just cares deeply about our ancient ways and cultures and religion, right? When she keeps tweeting far-right people and interviewing the National Party leader and such, do you think she's trying to tell us something? Okay, I don't think that she's going to come goose-stepping down the street, but she's far right. So her fellow conspiracist wackadoodle, Paul Joseph Watson, turned typical reactionary, shared this video in which a school pupil, I think in England or Scotland, appears to have been removed from class and is having a disagreement with his teacher. And I'm sure we'll play some clip from that as part of this. So this is just your typical reactionary sort of stuff. There's really nothing profound about it, but it's something all the same I want to talk about. So it appears in the video that the unknown young man, and I believe his teacher calls him Murray, has been voicing an opinion in class that there are only two genders. And I'm not sure what brought the topic up. Maybe they were having relationship and sex ed, or perhaps biology, who knows, whatever. But this young man appears to have vociferously fought his corner in arguing that there's only two genders. So I suspect the teacher has said that gender is a spectrum, that there are different people, different cultures, and different societies have had different understandings of gender, all of which is easily, again, a Google search will sort that out for you if you disbelieve it. But the teacher, I think, was making a reference to some sort of website or registration page, actually, saying, you could tick for your gender, male, female, or other. So I think it was something to do with that. I don't know what the context was, but something sparked it off anyway. And the young man tells his teacher there are only the two genders. And when the teacher disagrees, he said, well, that's your opinion. When the teacher says, no, there's more than two genders, he goes, well, that's just your opinion. And the teacher responds, it's his opinion, but it is the only acceptable opinion to the school, which is an inclusive school, right? And whereas the view that there are only two genders is in no way inclusive and not acceptable in an inclusive, which is trying to include trans and non-binary peoples. And so here's where this young man, Murray, pulls what has to be the ultimate troll move on the far right, right? This is like their bread and butter, and I assure you, this will come up in the comments section. I'll say that now. I bet this is going to come up. So, and there'll be so much for the tolerant left, right? So sitting there saying, no, there's only two genders. and thus excluding anybody who doesn't fit that very narrow conservative understanding of the concept of gender, very right-wing, far right-wing reactionary view of the concept of gender. This pupil complains that being told that such an opinion isn't acceptable. Well, that's not very inclusive of him, is it? That's not very inclusive of the kid saying, there's only two genders. And the far right do this every time. And unfortunately, their poisonous narrative has reached a lot of young people. And therefore, we have to respond. As leftists, we have to respond. We have to push and promote our own understanding backed by science and research and lived experience of working people. This idea that intolerance must be tolerated for the preservation of free speech or whatever is a typical act of playing the victim when you're not the victim. And the far right out there who are never done accusing minorities of playing the victim card, the reality is that the reactionary views and far right politics of the right are built on a foundation of aggrievement and perceived, complained victimhood, always decrying that they have been oppressed and excluded, and it's really just not fair that they can't say stuff that isn't true in any case and could be deemed abusive, right? It's really unfair that you can't just be homophobic for the sake of free speech or be transphobic for the sake of free speech. So look, here's the thing, right? Gender is a human-made concept. It's a construct. And what this kid and the far right, people sharing and uplifting this thing, the Paul Joseph Watsons, the Gemma O'Dohertys, the various wackadoodles, and the few thousand people actually sharing and laughing and commenting on it, defending the kid, attacking the school, saying it's just science, man. And calling the school authoritarian because it won't permit this kid to say that there's only two genders in a classroom environment. This school pupil is conflating the concept of gender with the biological sex of an individual. And they are not the same thing, and neither is strictly a binary. Gender is, as I said, a human-made construct that has shifted and morphed throughout time and continues to shift and morph throughout time across the world. The idea that there are only two genders, this notion that boys wear blue and girls wear pink, and that boys should play with boy toys like toy guns and trucks, while girls should play with girl toys like playhouses and dolls, is outdated and frankly dumb. Gender concepts are like roles that we are trained to believe that we should play. And from birth, we are often raised with a set of expectations and duties placed upon us either directly by other people or indirectly by a variety of forces in our societies. From the moment that young boy is told to stop playing with girls, the moment that that young girl is told that she should be ready to sacrifice her career and stay home raising her babies, that's her job, that's her duty, that's a mother's first thing. I think we all know gender is not something innate in us. It is taught to us. And it's just an idea that humanity made up. And like all ideas, we can actively change it. It changes on its own. It always has. But we can choose to change it. But to non-binary kids and to gender fluid kids and gender queer kids and trans kids, to all the kids out there who do not define themselves by either the outdated binary notion or to the biological sex is a definite thing linked innately to your gender identity, right? Just all of that's valid. These are people, human beings, and they deserve better than to simply be negated and told no, as they have been for centuries. So, in fact, even the way that I'm framing this conversation is inherently based on where I'm from and the gender norms that were handed to me by my society. But if I was from somewhere else, I might look at this and talk about it in a very different way, because there have always been other interpretations of gender. The Native Americans had two-spirit, and I think continue to have two-spirit people, which is, not simply male or female. Although most societies have historically organized using a gender binary linked to sex organs, many societies have included other genders and allowed people to adopt them. In India, Indonesia, Pakistan, and Mexico, there are examples. If you're interested, you can Wikipedia them. You can look it up. There are books. There's research. The idea that there are only two genders and that's just science is frankly an argument that I will give a teenager. I will give them a pass for making that argument. They are young. They have school on their plates. They are busy people. They have maybe just not had the opportunities, and they are still learning about the world and figuring themselves out. That's fine. That's a teenage kid. I am not attacking him, though I do not support those people who are backing him up. And I think that, he's wrong. I do think he's wrong. But I'm not attacking him as a person. I just think that he's young and misinformed. Paul Joseph Watson, on the other hand, is 38. And Paul, you have no excuse. Gemma O'Doherty, I believe, is 50. So, really no excuse. Again, Google. Research. That those people and others of their kind would repeat such a childish argument is frankly embarrassing to someone like me, and will be embarrassing to many leftists out there as we watch the car crash that is their politics. Go do some actual research. Maybe get your understanding from research and study, which are not always right. It's not the panacea universalis. As I said earlier, research can get it wrong. Scientists can get it wrong. They pathologized being LGBT when they shouldn't have. And okay, that's part of history. But they're getting better, and we have to keep fighting for it to get better. But, do some research. Talk to LGBT people. Learn about their lived experiences. Just please, for the love of whatever God you bow to, just get out of the echo chamber that you have constructed for yourselves online, just sharing each other's crap jokes about gender, Ben Shapiro and all these other various far right and right wing and conservative thinkers. Just do yourself a favor, whoever you are watching this. If you're into the whole, there's only two genders, it's just science, get over it. Facts don't care about your feelings. Please, just go and look some actual credible research up, and or maybe go find online stories of LGBT people and just give it a chance. And you never know, you might find you actually enjoy it and learn something. But in any case, it's okay that not everyone is on the same page, right? And there is a debate that rages on, even if many of us on the left think that there shouldn't be a debate. That debate exists. Is it really fair that a young person is removed from class for voicing a dissenting opinion, right? That'll be the question. This thing is a very authoritarian school. Is it really, how could they do this to this young person? And I believe he's actually been suspended for 3 weeks over this. I don't know what developed there, if it got worse after the camera was turned off, or if he said, well, actually, I'm going to go straight back into class and do it again. I'm not listening to any of you. So the question is, of course, okay, clearly people disagree. Is it okay to say, well, this is an inclusive school, get out of this classroom if you're going to be transphobic and you're going to deny people their right? Okay, well, yeah, it pretty much is. Why is it that LGBT people are the last fair target in our schools? If that kid or any kid sat in a class and said, well, I think white people are just smarter than black people, another argument often put forward by some far-right figures, would that be tolerated? Is that something that's up for a debate, a fair debate? If a kid did say that, come in and say, white people in the US on average score higher than black people on IQ tests, that's just science. Black people are just less intelligent on average than white people. Okay, that's not science. Okay, any reasonable individual who has an actual engaged mind rather than one that is trying to justify a prejudice that they have already found themselves with, any reasonable person would say that the achievement gap in the IQ stats might have more to do with disparity between races when it comes to history, disparity of wealth, the school funding, the ability to afford private tutors. There are many, many factors that go into this. So why boil it all down to skin and genetics and IQ tests? Any reasonable person would point out that there are different ways to measure intelligence, and different methods provide different pictures. And any reasonable person would point out that there are greater disparities within each racial group than there are even between races. It's got more to do with wealth, social standing, where you live, what your local services are like. It's got nothing to do with your skin color determining your thinking power. That's nonsense, right? So I'm a 30-year-old man. I'll argue with any adult pushing racist myths, and that's my decision to make. I will make a YouTube channel telling that Kitty's wrong and that Gemma O'Doherty and Paul Joseph Watson are stupid and irresponsible for sharing that stuff. I will make this video, I'll put it out there, and I will receive undoubtedly some colorful responses, right? But I'm an adult. I can make that decision. Kids in a classroom shouldn't be exposed to far-right myths and lies. And they shouldn't have to argue for their inclusion, their right to be treated equally, or to have to fight for the right to be themselves and be recognized. They are in a learning environment. They deserve to be included and safe. And so it's not up for debate. Schools should be inclusive, and if kids are going to sit there and be racist, Islamophobic, anti-Semitic, sexist, or yes, homophobic, biphobic, or transphobic, those kids should be informed that those views are not welcome in an inclusive classroom. And if they insist on pushing those discriminatory views and airing them, they should be asked to leave, so that those who are there and want to learn together as equals can get on with their lessons. And the far right, of course, will narrate this as brainwashing, totalitarianism. I imagine George Soros runs the school, or the Communist Party have taken over the Department of Education. But okay, I think anyone out there with half a brain will see it, that this accusation of totalitarianism and brainwashing it's absurd. If they're so worried about totalitarianism and brainwashing, where have these people been over the past decades of their lives as young trans pupils in schools have been told to wear this uniform but not the uniform you want, use that bathroom but not the bathroom you identify with, that changing room but not that changing room that you feel comfortable in. And no, we won't call you the name that you self-identify with. We're going to call you the name that's on your birth certificate, regardless of the fact that you're trans. And no, we won't acknowledge your non-binary thing. If you want to look at totalitarianism and brainwashing, where have you been? It's in every school, almost every school. It has long been the position. It's just that the totalitarianism and the brainwashing was the kind you kind of like. It was the one that backed up your prejudices, right? And now you're starting to lose ground in some of these schools, and you don't like it. And sorry, but that's just tough. So you don't want equality. I think that's pretty obvious. You don't want inclusion. Inclusion is actually a threat to your politics. And you certainly don't want research-based policies. And that's why we can't offer far-right people and the views that they express. We can't just include them and make them welcome to make other people unincluded and unwelcome. That is what they're doing. Because once you start to tolerate intolerance, it's only a matter of time before those people get the upper hand and set the clock back on all the progress that we've made. So we will tolerate a lot of things. We will include a lot of things. We will accept a lot of things. But your far-right nonsense is not one of those things. So last big story, and then a smaller story. Turning back to environmental issues for a moment, there was an article in the Irish Times website recently written by Harry McGee, political correspondent for that publication, entitled "Water Charges of €500 may be in the pipeline," get it, because it's water, "for those who waste." And we'll include links and such. And this was then followed by, and I encourage people to read that, if it's still up, read that before you listen to the rest of this. And this was followed by a response from David Gibney, who I believe is the coordinator of the Right to Water campaign in the South. Big campaign. If you haven't heard about it, look it up. It's a very interesting people-led movement against water privatization. And his response, his letter was entitled Water Charges and Excessive Usage. So that link will go up as well. I encourage you, read both letters, take in both viewpoints, and then if you want to listen to the rest of this. So basically, for those who aren't aware, governments both North and South in Ireland have long sought to introduce household water charges across the island of Ireland. In the south of Ireland, the proposal to introduce water charges was met by the most vociferous and unified protests Ireland has seen in a long time, or ever seen potentially, in terms of people getting up and marching in the streets. People united in their communities. They held sit-down protests. Some were very badly wounded, actually, by An Garda Síochána in those protests. I remember the story that I saw was a lot of middle-aged female protesters wearing pink jackets doing a sit-down protest in the sort of, I think it was the lobby, the revolving door perhaps, of a building. And An Garda Síochána's response was to come in and smash the glass and trail them all out, causing some of them damage. So people were hurt, yeah, and the police were very heavy-handed. But the people would not break or flee, and they kept the pressure on. They kept the pressure on politicians, and they took direct action. And then when no one party managed to secure a majority government in the 2016 Dáil Éireann elections down south, a supply and confidence arrangement was the outcome, with Fianna Fáil propping up Fine Gael, mostly, exclusively, let's face it, to avoid Sinn Féin getting into government in any way. So the issue of water charges then was very much to the forefront of public debate around those elections. And the result was that the new government put a halt to the plans to introduce metered charging. Again, 2016. Ostensibly so that an experts commission report on the funding of domestic water services could be carried out. And that was released, I think, in November 2016. And a commission for the regulation of utilities report was also carried out in 2017. And why these sorts of reports were not carried out before they started installing water meters in people's streets and sending them bills, I don't know. But I think it's safe to say that the outcry, the opposition, the protest generated by the people made the government and the various political parties that were in favour of water metering sit back and go, this actually might not be such a good idea. In any case, the government's plans down south to introduce metered water charging for domestic residents was kicked into touch, as one Fine Gael politician complained after the elections. But as predictable, the issue never went away. And now at the end of, it's the 1st of July, so at the end of last month, a decision was to be made by the Commission for the Regulation of Utilities proposed by Irish Water that would, a proposal which is essentially see charges for people deemed to be using too much water. And the regulator has said that the proposal from Irish Water broadly satisfies the principles of fairness and equality. This is because the proposal has taken on board certain findings of the Commission's report, and there are caveats to who will have to pay. Basically, you get a maximum amount of water use per household, and for every person in your house above 4 people, you get an additional amount added to your threshold. For every 1,000 litres you use above your maximum threshold, you'll be charged €1.85. With certain allowances for you can apply for relief. If someone in your house is ill, for example, you can apply for relief from charges. And if they find a leak is causing your excess water usage, then Irish Water say they'll fix that the first time for a fee, right? But after that, you'll need to maintain your own pipes. All in all, this new proposal may sound reasonable to many people in Ireland. Many people listening may go, well, that doesn't sound that bad. As it does specifically cover some of the concerns raised about metering households. And opposition TDs in Dáil Éireann, however, have objected to the proposal, saying this is merely the thin edge of the wedge in the effort to start metering all houses and getting them to pay for their water according to their water meter readings that they're going to get. And the way I see it, clean water is, let's face it, it's a human right. It's not a commodity to be bought and sold. It is the fundamental basis for all life on Earth. So it's not a commodity, not yet at least. Not until the planet is truly on its last legs and we're all willing to murder each other over that last bottle of Ballygowan, which is terrifyingly the direction that we may be heading towards. In any case, the best thing I've read in response to the proposal to introduce these charges comes from the coordinator of Right to Water, which is David Gibney, and in his letter. So I would really encourage people to read that letter. In the letter to the Irish Times, Dave rightly points out that this narrative being pushed hard by the pro-charges politicians is completely out of sync with the findings of the regulator. Irish people do not generally waste water. In fact, again, research, in fact, as a nation, our water usage is some of the lowest in Europe. So it's not like we are being wasteful and using up a lot of water as a nation. The other argument for those who want to charge Irish households is that it isn't about the money, it's about reducing consumption, right? It's an environmentalist policy. But Irish households on average use 25% less water than UK households, where water charges have been in place for 30 years. So are water charges actually in any way likely to reduce consumption? It doesn't sound like it to me. But the EU's Water Framework Directive, that states, the need to conserve adequate supplies of a resource for which demand is continuously increasing, water, is one of the drivers behind what is arguably one of the directive's most important innovations, the introduction of pricing. Adequate water pricing acts as an incentive for the sustainable use of water resources and thus helps to achieve the environmental objectives under the directive, right? Not the economic objectives, not the drive of the EU to bring everything out of the public hands into private corporate hands. No, that's got nothing to do with it. Don't look at that. That's behind the curtain. Don't look at that. Look at the environmental stuff. We have to charge you for using water because it will help the earth, even though there's no evidence of that. But in any case, we want your money. So, okay. So Ireland uses less water than most EU nations and a substantially lower amount of water than the UK, where there are already charges for 3 decades. That's enough time to do some research and figure things out. So why are prices and charging Irish people going to be good for the environment? Can someone tell me? If there happens to be an EU minister watching this show, please let me know. Please write in. I'd be very interested to know the argument. The charges... So the only way that I can think of that working is that the charges encourage people to use less water, which is very unlikely given everything that we've just said, and that the funds raised, right? The other argument is that the funds raised by the excess charges will go into some sort of a fund to pour back into environmentalism and efficiency, right? But in fact, that second notion, I think we've put the first one to bed, right? It's not going to reduce consumption. But the second one is, okay, well, those who excessively use water will pay their $1.85 per 1,000 gallons, and that will then be redistributed into positive environmental actions, right? Dave Gibney, in his letter, he in fact blows that suggestion out of the water. There's a lot of water puns in this episode. I realized that, no one likes puns, but we're going to have to throw some in. I have a few friends who really love puns. So, Dave in his letter explains that if you had 70,000 households paying the full possible fine, which is €500, right? That would raise only €35 million, right? The running of Irish Water, they were going to have a call center to deal with all of this stuff. And the running of that call center alone is going to cost 40 million. And then you've got servicing of meters, and installation and servicing of those is going to cost a further 54 million. And then simply the postage costs alone for sending out water bills and notifications, that's going to cost another 6 million. So a scheme designed to prevent waste is going to spend in excess of €100 million every year to run an excessive usage charge system for a maximum return of 35 million. How does that make any sense? You are spending more money to chase these rates and these excessive usage charges. You're spending more to collect them and get them and meter them than you are getting back. So no, it won't raise money to put into environmental causes. Actually, it's just going to take a huge chunk of money out of the Irish budget that could have otherwise been put towards environmental issues. And some of those things would be, as Dave points out, again, truth to power. It's a brilliant letter. 50% of water is lost in Ireland due to leaks in pipes. 18% of treated water is used by households. But 38% of water is used by industry. And over half of those industrial bodies are not paying their bills at present. And bottled water companies are currently using up God knows how much of our water for free so that they can bottle it and sell it. So, and to the last point, Dave points out that the Irish government's own commission report suggested that a referendum on public ownership of water should be held. But that's something the Irish government is refusing to allow. Look, folks, this is an argument that's been had over and over again over the last few years, and it's an argument that's just going to have to keep continuing until water is put in public hands and put in the Constitution as a public service, a utility, not a commodity. Water is, as I've said, a fundamental requirement of life, and Irish people pay through their taxes and their various taxes for their water services. Additional meter charging is going to cost more than it'll bring in, so it will run at a loss, and it won't reduce consumption. It's going to be a huge waste of public money to chase after a very tiny number of people who are overusing water, and they're not even overusing that much. So the only people that are going to profit out of this are capitalists, are people who run private water services and people who want to move all of the water into private hands. So, but the solution is, for a start, get those industrial companies that are using 38% of Ireland's water, get the ones that aren't paying their bills to cough up. Why are we even talking about pursuing a tiny number of households that use more than average water when we already know that there are big businesses out there using even more water and not paying for it? And we also know that investing in broken pipes would be a bigger reduction, better reduction of consumption, because half the water being lost isn't even because people are using it. It's because the pipes need fixed. So if you want to spend 100 million euro setting up a service, a charge system, just fix the pipes. And from an environmentalist point of view, this whole plastic bottled water thing is a ludicrous thing to exist. Never mind that we allow them to take water to make profits. Phase out single-use plastic bottles for water. Encourage people to carry their own reusable bottles. And a system of public filling stations for water around Ireland would be a wonderful thing to see. And it would do more for the environment than billing people for water usage and sending out God knows how many letters from cut down trees as bills and all these other nonsense solutions. Overall, though, I think that a constitutional referendum has to be held. I agree with the Commission report that the government is ignoring that bit. The water wars can't just keep being rerun every few years. We push them back, and they recoil because of public protest, and then they wait for it to die down, and then they have another go, and they have another go a little bit sneakier this time, and the thin edge of the wedge will get them in the end. That is not a solution for the working people of Ireland. We need a constitutional referendum. We need a debate, a proper debate on public water. It's really time for the Irish people to, I think, unfortunately, get ready to take to the streets once again. I attended a few protests last year in Dublin. I will be down there again if the government tries this and protests start once more. It's absolutely vital. So, but let's take this fight to the constitutional level. Let's fight for a progressive, environmentally sound and fairly taxed public utility. And I haven't talked about the North very much in this episode. There's not enough time. But although water charges were defeated in the North by unions like NIPSA and others, and by campaigners and good people, some of whom I happen to know. Despite that, my understanding is that money is still being put aside for the installation of water meters. I don't know if they're still putting the water meters into certain places, but they are certainly still planning and preparing to put water meters in. So the North, again, until you have a definitive solution, you do not have a solution. You've just pushed it down the road a little bit. So we'll talk about the North more in another episode, I'm sure, whenever this issue crops back up again. So turning to the last story for this episode, something slightly more lighthearted. It's not really lighthearted, but you could derive some grim humor from it. A Polish man, it turns out, I saw this story, a Polish man from a place called Pajezno. I've undoubtedly got that one wrong as well, but was part of a team tasked with moving a Soviet-era T-55 tank from A to B. I'm not sure where he was going, but at some point in the night, he decided to take this tank for a joyride late at night. Apparently, according to the reports, he had been drinking. I think if you're going to take a tank for a joyride, I can't think of any other reason you would do that other than he'd been drinking. That's how most ridiculous things, I think, tend to happen. The Russian broadcaster RT, has to be said, took immense delight in reporting the incident. Their article, you can practically hear them chuckling to themselves. They said that although he was authorized to move the tank, he's probably not authorized to move it whilst drunk, and not authorized to take a late night spin around town. And as if driving a tank around whilst pissed is in an urban area is not dangerous enough, RT reported that the tank was also apparently not properly insured to be on the road. So it's a very good thing that he didn't do any damage to it, you know. The unnamed individual, it turns out, could get 10 years in prison for driving a tank whilst drunk, and for creating a dangerous situation. I'd not encourage drunk driving in a tank or in any other vehicle for that matter, but I just think I have to say it is somewhat impressive that a drunk man decided to take a tank and drive it around in an urban area at night and actually managed not to kill anyone or to crush anything or to knock any buildings over. So from that I derive that he's probably ex-military, and now he's also ex-tank delivery guy. So that's everything for this episode. Again, I look forward to your comments, including the far right ones, because, you know, I like being commented on my appearance and being called a leftist. I can confirm that, by the way. When I said in the first episode that I am a communist and a member of the Communist Party, I think it's somewhat redundant to come on to our channel and say, you're just a leftist. I was like, yeah, I am. So, yep, to the small band of friends and followers, hope you got something useful out of this. To the far right, I hope that if nothing else, I have encouraged you to go and read some of the research. And as always, to our patron, George Soros, hope you enjoy the show. Bye.